Welcome to Convention Reviews. Today we'll be talking about Game and Geek Expo. This was a brand new convention focusing on retro video games and video game culture and took place at the Raleigh Convention Center. This convention center has also become very popular with many other nerd-related events in the RTP area, with the event itself taking place primarily in the main basement area of one of the wings, as well as a few of the smaller panel rooms upstairs. The event itself was sponsored by Hidden Block Games, which is a local retro game shop in Raleigh, as well as the Raleigh Retro Gamers Group, which has been holding events throughout the Carolinas, such as EboshoCon in the last year or so. The basement area was primarily where most of the events and dealers hall was located, as well as several other components to the convention itself. One of the big ones being there was a main stage where many of the featured acts were held, as well as there were several other features throughout the event, such as several gaming tournaments, as well as an old school retro arcade, among many others. A really cool feature of this was that somebody had also brought in their DeLorean car as an interesting piece too. This added another cool layer to the retro gaming feel. One of the other aspects that was really cool about this convention was that they had a lot of developers, video games that also came to the show as well, who were basically spotlighting some of the works that they were currently working on that would later hopefully be available on Steam or other platforms, which is a really cool way to kind of tie in the fact that, RTP does have quite a large video game developer community. And this kind of event is a really great way to self-promote their own works, but also their own brands, as well as potentially get a little bit of beta testing back in as well, which really kind of feeds back into the fact that, this really is kind of fostering a very video game positive community. Another added guest was the 501st Legion, which is the Star Wars fan group, actually came into this convention as well, which was really interesting to see them promote their own works as well. This really showed a wide diversity of content at this particular event as well. One thing that was really cool was the fact that there were a lot of really interesting panels throughout this weekend. One of the first that I actually attended was sort of a Saturday morning cartoon block that played a lot of classic 80s cartoons, and the panelists actually had some cereal boxes, which was kind of a fun little added treat. Another interesting panelist had done a kind of a retrospective on sort of the early war between Sega and Nintendo back in the early 1990s, trying to get their consoles off the ground, which was really interesting to see kind of the behind the scenes kind of nuts and bolts of that. There also were several other panelists that were professional video game creators that were also giving comment, but there also were some other interesting ones where several retro video game store owners also were kind of giving their perspective on what it was like to own a video game store, which is pretty fun. There also were several invited comedians, as well as one or two voice actors. Specifically, one was notoriously known for being the voice actor for Albert Wesker from the Resident Evil video games, which was pretty fun. Another really interesting panelist, going by Nickology, really did a really interesting insight onto the aspects of physical and digital video games and how to preserve them throughout time, and really kind of gave an interesting kind of, blow by blow from decades of sort of like how gaming companies try to basically prevent piracy and preventing other issues of, keeping media locked away, and sort of a lot of the problems that we're now facing with the fact that a lot of physical media is starting to go the wayside to digital, and the fact that there isn't really a good means of preserving these forms of entertainment and art for prosperity. Another really fun aspect of this convention was that they had a really fun little cosplay contest on Saturday, which gathered quite a decent amount of interesting cosplayers from various forms of not only video game, but also anime and comic book, among many others. There were actually some really interesting cases, some really old school examples, like from the older Final Fantasy games, as well as Gex, among many others, which was really an interesting take on the fandom as well. Saturday also featured a After Dark event for VIP members, which was a really fun way to kind of meet guests as well as kind of kick back a little bit in the after hours. It was a really nice touch for this small event that, honestly seemed pretty worth it if you were into that kind of thing. On Sunday, they had a special guest, Brian Collin, do a really interesting panel covering kind of his life and career, essentially working for Midway Games as well as far after that. His big name to fame is that he was one of the primary creators of the game Rampage, which was insanely successful both in the arcade as well as the home console over time, as well as the fact that he, even after the console wars of the 90s, he kind of spun off and kind of did his own thing, which, really is kind of an interesting aspect, especially for people who don't really follow some of the older creators quite as closely as some of the others, which, it's an interesting perspective to say the least. One of the last events for Sunday that I attended was the Idol Fest, which is starting to become very popular at many nerd-related events. Essentially, this is a choreography dance usually to various K-pop and Japanese music, which was pretty fun. One thing that was actually kind of unique was that they actually had a virtual VTuber also participate, which I haven't really seen at other events. But overall, it was a really fun gathering of performers for this to kind of end the Sunday. Overall, I had a really fun time at this event, and I really hope that the Gaming Geek Expo comes back next year and really is able to improve upon a lot of the things they began with. It definitely has a lot of potential to become a much bigger event over time, and I think there's definitely a major desire to have more video game related stuff in the Triangle. Please let me know if you attended this event, and if not, I will see you in the next convention review.